are live.
Okay.
So good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. Good evening and welcome to our session today. So this is the final session of our Creators Camp for podcasters and YouTubers. And today we have a special guest who is coming to teach us and speak to us about the arts and science and the techniques and tactics of today. So this is the final session of our Creators Camp. Okay, let's see. I have a bit of an echo. So the art and science of speaking and presenting, so I'm going to just hand over to Kenny Ajayi. But before I do, let me just quickly introduce him. So our guest today is Kenny Ajayi, who is So Kenny was appointed he works as a program director, patient safety at the Imperial College Health Partners. And he was appointed in July 2016. He's now the associate director for quality improvement and safety. So he's responsible for ensuring that partners set and pursue clear objectives for improving patient safety based on the recommendations of the National Safety Advisory Group of 2013. So his role, he has, so prior to joining the partnership, where was I? I'm so sorry, pardon. Beg your pardon. Okay, so his role also involves driving change and innovation in patient safety across the health and social care system in Northwest London. Earlier in his career, he was a physiotherapist and he later held roles in clinical ergonomics and human factors in the NHS and local authority. And then he has also held director roles in consultancy, providing risk management services to the NHS, local authorities, and the private sector. He has 2 master's degrees, firstly in ergonomics and human factors from University College London, and secondly in integrated governance in healthcare. Kenny has a range of public sector as well as commercial and consulting experience. So that is a mouthful for me. But then I think what we need to know is that Kenny is bringing to us today a wide range of experience. I met him through some work that I did with Career Nuggets, and I have seen him various times on stage. And I've also done some work with him, with his group, which is something that is his passion project, where he helps pastors, teachers, and young speakers to train them on speaking and presenting. So it is based on that I've asked him to come and speak to us today. So please welcome with me, Kenny Ajayi. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for the kind invitation and the kind introduction, I should say. Tonight, I believe I have an hour. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So I intend to speak for about 45 minutes and then leave about 15 minutes at the end for question and answer.
Okay.
And but I often have a lot more material than I can cover in any one session. I don't know whether it's something to do with speakers generally, but you tend to over prepare. But anyway, let's see how it goes. I'll aim to speak for 45 minutes and then we'll appraise the situation in 45 minutes. So I
Can I just say that I love your topic?
Okay, thank you.
The topic is just also so on point, and I would say just forgive us if we're a couple of us don't show up. They will definitely see the recording,
Okay.
because this is very, very pertinent to what we are doing as podcasters and YouTubers.
Okay.
So,
right, so thank you. So connecting with your audience is a subject I'm very passionate about, and there are a number of things that I want to say upfront before we start. The first is that I consider myself a student of rhetorics and public communication or public speaking, and I've studied that subject now for a number of years, and I never get fascinated. I never stop getting fascinated about the intricacies and complexities and just the what's the word? The fascination of the subject of public speaking. So I have a number of slides to talk through, and there are essentially about 4 main points that I want to make tonight. And I will go on to my next one. So that's the topic, connecting with your audience. And I guess the first thing I'd like to do really is to explore this subject of connection. Now, the reality is for podcasters and anyone who communicates in the public space in some shape or form, there are the intention that everyone in that space has, the intention that you have, the intention I have, the intention that everyone who speaks in a public space has, is that you will be memorable. Now, once upon a time, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we had a different information challenge to the one we have now. 20, 30, 40 years ago, we had a challenge with information, and it was information scarcity. So to be able to get anything done and to get the information that you need, you have to go through several hurdles. You have to go through several challenges. You have to seek high and low. Information was very exoteric, and only people who had certain access had information. But the challenge we have in this day and age, in the current space and epoch of time we live in, is one of information gluttony. So we have an excess of information, and the challenge you have is, as a content provider of any kind, it's not one of getting the right content, but it's one of getting heard in the multiplicity of voices that compete in your space. There are ways to get around that, but I say that to say that essentially, what we're really looking to do, what you are looking to do, what I'm really looking to do, is to be memorable. Because whether you're doing a podcast or a workshop or a seminar or a conference, or you're presenting a tender or you're at an interview, ultimately, you want to do something that makes you stand out. You want to do something that's memorable. You want to do something that allows people to remember you, and days after, weeks after, even years after, that they can connect your message to your name and to your brand. And that's what makes you stand out. That's the bottom line. Everybody, essentially, the space is getting crowded by the minute. And what everybody wants to do is to stand out. And so I want to share a few principles that I think are helpful in making you connect with an audience in a way that helps you to stand out. So the one thing I want to start with is to say that connecting with an audience is an art and a science, but it's something that can be learned. I believe there are people who are especially gifted to communicate on the one hand, and those people stand out. However, I also believe that you can learn to communicate to the point where you also stand out. So there are certain people who are just specially gifted, and they stand and they connect with an audience, they electrify the place, they come into the room, they start to speak, and the sparks are flying, the place is lit up with light, and they're just naturals. And that's just something about them. However, there are also others who have learned over time to master the craft of communication and connecting to the point where they can do a very, very excellent job, and they can still leave the memorable impression that you want to leave with your audience by being remembered and by you having a positive connection with your brand after your message. So the message is, it is possible to learn the art of communication and connecting with an audience to the point where you become memorable if you just master a few principles. So the first thing I want to say about the first principle I want to discuss is one of being authentic. This is one that is just so important. In order to connect with your audience, you have got to be your real self. I mean, just think about it at a very basic level. You are the best version of yourself. That's the bottom line. The moment you try to be somebody else, the moment you try to imitate somebody else, the moment you try to be a counterfeit of somebody else, then essentially the best you can achieve is second best. Right. So the best thing you can do for yourself, and whatever else I say tonight, whatever else I say in this presentation, if you don't master this one, you will never, ever really come into your full potential as a podcaster or as a YouTuber or as an influencer or a thought leader of any kind. Until you master this, you have got to believe first in yourself that what you've got to offer is of value enough for you to be comfortable in your own skin. Until you master that, you are never going to really come to the full expression of your potential. That's just the way it is. Because the moment you try to be somebody else, first, two things will happen. First is that you are now trying to act, and that puts extra pressure on the attentional resources you have. As it is, public speaking is already challenging as it is. Speaking in any form or shape, as a podcaster, as an influencer, as a YouTuber, as a public speaker, is already challenging. It already makes a huge demand on your attentional resources. The last thing you want to do is to layer another layer of complexity on that by trying to pretend to be somebody else.
Yes.
So the second thing, of course, is that puts extra stress into the process. And stress is not good for performance in any way. And therefore, be yourself. And I learned this in a very interesting way. I've been privileged to be involved in public speaking in some shape or form since my early 20s. And I quickly got into two spaces. I quickly got into the secular space where I presented professionally at workshops, at seminars, and eventually at conferences. And then I also got into the sacred space, if you like, in church, where I spoke at church meetings, I spoke at conferences, I spoke at events. And for some reason, I never really made a connection between the two. For some reason in my mind, I dissociated my sacred church speaking persona or my church speaking platform from my secular platform for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure why it happened, but I did. And I found out that I was a lot more natural and a lot more myself in the sacred space, in the church space, in the pulpit space than perhaps in another platform, perhaps in a secular platform. And one time it dawned on me, it dawned on me only after I'd made the transition. Anyway, cut a long story short, about 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, thereabout, I was speaking at a conference of top professionals in Birmingham. I was invited to speak on a subject that is one of the subjects of my professional interest. And there were about maybe 400, maybe 450 top professionals on that subject in the room on the day at the National Motorcycle Museum Center in Birmingham. And as we were riding, my colleague and I had spent the night in Birmingham. We were now riding from the hotel in a taxi to the conference venue. And my colleague began to ask me what I was speaking about. And I told her what the subject was. And I said I was looking to do something I'd never done before, which was to just speak ad lib and just basically dissociate myself from my dependence on my notes and my PowerPoint slide and just speak from my heart. That's something I've done a lot of times in the sacred space as such, in church or in conferences, Christian conferences, but I didn't necessarily done in the secular space, because I just had this impression that in the secular space, they expect you to give data, they expect you to be professional, they expect you to give content. Anyway, so I said to her, that's what I was going to do. So she said, okay, well, that sounds interesting. It sounds daring, but you must know what you're doing, so go for it. So I got up on the platform, got introduced, got up, and I had 20 minutes to speak. And I said to the audience, now, today I'm going to do something I haven't done in maybe 20 years of doing this sort of thing. I am going to speak to you from my slides for about 5 or 10 minutes maximum. And for the rest of the time, I will spend my time telling anecdotes and stories of my personal experience of this project. Because in sincerity, whatever I tell you from my slides, you can read anywhere else, because these are scientific facts. You can read them on the internet if you do enough research, if you look up enough textbooks, read enough scientific paper. What I'm about to tell you now is already in this public space. And besides, I've presented on this subject several times. So what I'm about to tell you from my slides, you can get from somewhere else. But what I'm about to tell you from my heart, you cannot get from somewhere else, because it's my experience. And in reality, this is what really makes this project work. I said often you come into these spaces, these secular spaces, and people talk to you about data. They talk to you about science. But what they don't really tell you is the real experiences, the behind the scenes experiences that make things work. And so I stood up and I did the slides for about 5-10 minutes. And then I switched up my slides, went away from the podium, stood right in front of the platform, right? And just spoke from my heart for about 15 minutes nonstop, and just shared the real experiences behind the results and the outcomes that we produced. And I got a response after that presentation that I hadn't previously got from all the professional things I'd done it previously. And I learned 2 lessons. The first lesson I learned is that however professional, however scientific, however prim and proper a setting is, the reality is people want to connect with the person behind the presentation. And when you allow yourself to be vulnerable in that respect, it's amazing how you connect. The real person connects with them. The second lesson I learned is that from that experience, it dawned on me that all the professional presentations I had done up to that point in time, I had given my audience a substandard version of myself, because I'd always put a limitation on myself to say, you don't tell personal stories in these settings. You only give them the science and the content and you leave. And from that experience, it taught me that people really want to know the inside story. They want to go behind the scenes and really know what makes this thing work, because everything else they can read in a book. So, and a colleague said to me, a colleague of mine who's very astute, very competent, very good at what she does. She said to me, she said, I have an accent. I grew up in Essex, and I have an accent. I have an Essex accent. I have a Cockney accent. She says, and that's who I am. And she said, for a long time, I think she's in a maybe late 30s now. She said, for a long time, as a young person, I struggled with that, and I didn't necessarily want people to know that part of me. I didn't want them to necessarily know that I was from Essex. I wasn't proud of my Cockney accents. But she says now, I wear it as a badge of honor. And I don't care. That's who I am. That's where I grew up. You can't change that about me. And I'm not going to put myself in a cage just because I grew up in Essex. It's up to you if you want to, whatever you want to think about Essex, you think about Essex. But when I come and I do my stuff, after I've done my stuff, I hope that you are not judging me based on my Essex accent. You're judging me based on the content I've delivered. And I won't put myself in a cage and be a lesser version of myself just because I want to hide my Cockney accent. and it's just amazing. I can go on and on. This is one of my the biggest things that I think public speakers need to know. This is very important. It's very important because I see it again and again and again. I see people who are from a certain part of the world trying to speak like they're from another part of the world. I mean, I see, let me just call a spade and not a farming instrument. I see especially, I think it's obvious from my accent that I grew up in Nigeria. I see especially Nigerians, African people who, for whatever reason, have relocated to other parts of the world, whether that's Canada or the United States or United Kingdom, who try to masquerade their accent. And I think to myself, why on earth are they doing that? So I said earlier that I have the privilege professionally to speak at conferences, literally up and down the breadth of this country. And I have never on one occasion tried to masquerade my accent or try to make it any different from what it is. Why would I want to do that? Chances are that 9 out of 10 times, most of the time, if there are 10 speakers in the room where I'm speaking, 8 of them probably have a different accent from me. 8 of them probably have some variation of the British accent. Why would I, 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, if you like, why would I want to go up to that stage and speak exactly the way they speak and try and be somebody who I'm not? When in actual fact, the uniqueness of my speech to start with is the way I speak. I mean, I come into the room and there's a very good chance, there's an 80% chance that they'll be hearing an accent that they haven't heard all day long. Why would I then want to change that? So in other words, sometimes we turn our advantages, because we're ignorant, we turn our advantages into disabilities. One of my assets is the way I speak. So why would I want to hide that? Anyway, I can go on and on that subject, but I think I've made the point. So first, be your authentic self, because if you are not, you are shortchanging yourself. You are putting an unnecessary layer of complexity into your presentation, and it's not worth it. So that's one. Now, I already mentioned some common barriers. I was going to make this as an interactive exercise, but in terms of common barriers why people are not themselves, some people are not themselves because of they think they sound different from anybody else. I've said that. Some people are not themselves because they think they're not as educated as other people. Some people are not themselves because they think they don't look like other people. Some people are not as they're not confident in themselves because they don't think they know as much as other people, or they feel like they're not as qualified as other people, or they haven't had the mastery of the subject. The bottom line is, let's even put it this way. The worst thing that can happen is that you turn up at an event or you're speaking on a platform, and for whatever reason, the organizers made a mistake. They made a mistake because they've invited you, or you're speaking at a platform, or your podcast is reaching a platform, or your YouTube channel is reaching a platform where it's way above your league. Let's even assume that happens. Well, what if it happens? Right? At the very least, at least give the best version of yourself. Give the best version of yourself so that people go away thinking, oh, even though it felt like they were out of their league, at the very least, at least they gave a good account of themselves. That's the least that anybody can do. And so the bottom line is, somebody says, and I agree, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission. If you ever go away from a setting, whatever setting it was, and you felt inferior, the reason you felt inferior is because you gave people permission to make you feel inferior. It's all in your mind. So, and the reality is, for everyone who communicates in the public space, until we conquer that mountain, until you are standing and owning your space and being the real version of yourself, we will never get the best out of you. So I want to move on to my second point now, because for the sake of time. So this is the second point I want to make. Now, I encourage you to watch this video, by the way. I encourage you to watch this podcast. The podcast is not the word I'm looking for. It's a TEDx talk, and it's a TEDx talk by a guy called Brian Stevenson. Brian Stevenson's TEDx talk has been watched only on the TEDx site alone, just what they have on their site, 7,687,116 times. In June, when I was doing a version,
I think I've watched it.
You've watched it.
He's talking about his grandmother or something like that.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. And this is one of the most watched, I think, in fact, it's the most watched TEDx talk in the history of TEDx. Not only that, it's one of the most rated as influential, the most influential rated by speakers in the history of TEDx talk. And also it had the highest duration, the longest duration of standing ovation for TEDx talks. I looked at this site. I looked at the TEDx talk tonight, just before we started the session tonight, and the figure I quote tonight is 7,687,000. When I looked at the same site in June, when I was doing a similar version of this talk, it was 7,625,000. So between June and now, about 60,000 people, extra people or persons had viewed that talk. It's that popular. But anyway, the reason I want to bring this up is that this guy was invited to do a TEDx talk. He's a civil rights lawyer in America. And when he was invited to do the talk, he almost turned it down because the very month he was doing the talk, I believe it was in 2012, September of 2012. And the very month he was doing the talk, he had 2 Supreme Court cases to argue in America, and therefore he was going to turn it down. So he discussed it with his team, and his team said, "Don't, in your wildest dreams, don't ever think of turning down a TEDx talk." Do you know what TEDx is? Anyway, he had never heard of TEDx before then. So anyway, he agrees to do the talk, and as a result of the talk, somebody heard him speak at TEDx, and as a result of that, I believe they donated $1 million to his non-for-profit organization just by hearing him speak at TEDx. But that's not the point I want to make tonight. The point I want to make tonight is that this guy made such an impact, and a student of rhetoric and a leading thought leader in rhetoric decided to study his speech. And you may know that Aristotle, Greek philosopher, is one of the founding fathers, or you could say one of the godfathers of public speaking, or the art of communication, or the study of communication or rhetoric. And Aristotle says that there are 3 things that have to be present in a talk to make that talk work. The first, it needs to have ethos. Ethos is about credibility. It's about gravitas. It's about the experience and the competence and the credibility of the speaker. So this guy came to TEDx, and a civil rights lawyer, had won some landmark Supreme Court cases in his sphere of influence, which is social justice. Secondly, there's pathos, and pathos is about passion. It's about emotion. It's about the raw vulnerability that the speaker brings to the subject. And then third is logos. Logos is about statistics. It's about data. It's about science. Right. Now, the interesting thing is this, that for Brian Stevenson's talk, this guy assessed his talk and apportioned it into those 3 different categories. Let me go back to the previous slide for a minute. So apportions it into these 3 categories. And here is the interesting thing. I want you to engage with me for a minute now. If you were to apportion the talk, or tell me what you think the winning formula is, tell me what you think the winning ratio is. What's the winning ratio for a talk in terms of the amount of the talk that deals with ethos, credibility, gravitas on the one hand, pathos, passion, emotions in the middle, and logos, statistics, data, science. In your view, if you were to apportion 100% of a talk, what do you think is the winning ratio for apportioning those different parts of the talk to be able to make the most influence on your audience? You can.
I think for the let me give my answer, and I'm sure maybe DK might have something to say.
Okay.
I think for the standard podcast episode, we will be told to do maybe 60-70% logos, which is the content, and then the rest will be divided between the ethos and pathos might be equally divided.
Okay.
But yeah, so that's what the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Or it's the normal, it's mostly content, and then say who you are for that credibility, and then the pathos, the pathos might even be the least, the passion. Or...
Interesting.
For me, I would say I was thinking pathos for me because, like you said, knowledge is everywhere. It's about your passion and how people can connect with your authenticity. I'm not sure. I haven't listened to the TED Talk. I was tempted to go and listen to it. One time we were talking about it, and I'm like, Emma, you've deprived me. But I said, no, I'm going to be on a good behavior. So to me, I think, yes, I always over-prepare for anything. So that's definitely something you should have. The credibility, your credibility counts. But to me, I think sometimes the passion someone has for a project just makes me buy into their story instantly. So I would give pathos 60%, and the others I would give it 20-20 personally, based on what I think when it comes to storytelling. Okay,
that's interesting. Let's keep going, and we'll come to a compromise of some sort, or some kind of middle ground. But interesting that you see it from different perspectives. Now, let me talk a bit about pathos, and then and by the way, let me just throw this out there. So Brian Stevenson's talk was 65% pathos. Yes, it was 65% pathos. I believe it was 10%. Let me see. It was 65% pathos, 25% logos, and 10% ethos. So 65% of is, and Emma, maybe if you listen to it again, you can possibly try and look at it from that lens. Yeah. That 65% of what is said was storytelling. 65%.
And Kenny, I must say, that 5% ethos is what a lot of us focus on and use to hold ourselves back as well, to say, oh, I don't have the credentials, I don't have the, they're not going to listen to me, because of who I am or how I sound and all that kind of thing. So people concentrate on that 5%, not knowing that, at least from your example, it is 5% of a very good talk.
Yeah. So let me try and weave this second point. I haven't nailed it on the head just yet, but I think you know where this is going. So weaving your presentation into an authentic narrative is one of the most powerful things you can do to connect with your audience. So now, human beings are designed and wired to connect with stories. This is just the way we are wired. The reality is that the human brain is wired to connect with stories. And science, you see, in this day and age, over the last 16, 20 years, we found out more about the neurobiology of the human brain than everything we learned from the beginning of time. In other words, everything we learned from the time we started to study the human brain up until, say, about 2004, roughly, right, is much less than what we learned between 2004 and now.
Oh, wow.
Right, because we've made tremendous progress because of so-called imaging and imaging facilities, for example, MRI scans and all of those different technologies have told us a lot about how the brain works. Now, a study was carried out by the Princeton University, and here is what they found. They found out they put a speaker in front of an audience and got the speaker to talk. When the speaker spoke science and they just churned out statistics and they just churned out scientific stuff, they put some scan, they took a scan of the speaker's brain and the brain of the listeners. There were 11 listeners in the experiment in the room. And they found out that every time the speaker went from churning out materials, went from churning out statistics and content, when they went to speaking stories, when they went to sharing stories, two things happened. First was that the brain activity in the speaker's brain exactly mirrored the brain activity in all of the audience's brain, all of them.
That's what I would have thought.
Not only that, about that same time, the exact spots, in other words, the exact areas of the brain where activity was happening in the speaker's brain was the exact area of the brain where activity was happening in the listener's brain. So in other words, the scientists describe this as brain-to-brain coupling. So here is the deal. Every single person in the room right now, every person listening to this podcast or this presentation in any shape or form is listening because you have an interest in the subject in some shape or form. And you're listening because ultimately you want to leave a memorable message in the mind of your listeners. The easiest way to do it is to tell a story without fail, again and again and again. Because when you tell a story, you are subconsciously planting ideas, emotions, and thoughts into the brains of your listeners without they even knowing it. It happens at a subconscious level. Here is another reason why it happens. Another reason why it happens is that stories, good stories, have a way of inspiring, what's the word I'm looking for? Good stories have a way of generating suspense. And the human brain is wired to release a substance called dopamine. Some of the people in the room would be familiar with the word dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone.
Yeah.
Dopamine is the reason why people are addicted to sugar, why they're addicted to all kinds of things. Because when they take those things that they're addicted to, it releases dopamine in their brain. Now, when we tell a story, it generates suspense. Suspense releases dopamine, and therefore that suspense, that release of dopamine makes you almost addicted to listening to the speaker at a subconscious level. So storytelling is one of the most powerful things a podcaster, a YouTuber, anybody who operates in this public space, storytelling is one of the most powerful things you can do because it makes you connect with your audience at a very subconscious level. Here is the other thing that happens. Now, it doesn't matter what your religious persuasion is. It doesn't matter whether you're an atheist or you're a Muslim or you're a Christian or you're a Hindu or you're a Sikh or a Buddhist. All those things don't matter. It is generally agreed that Jesus was one of the most powerful storytellers and one of the most powerful communicators of all time. Everybody agrees that, right? Now, guess what? Some theologians have studied everything that Jesus said and did. And they found out that essentially, Jesus, who essentially is one of the most outstanding, in my reckoning, the most outstanding religious leader that ever lived and ever will live. Jesus's speeches were 65% stories. Everything Jesus preached was 65% stories, right? So I'm making that point to say that held true with Jesus. It also holds true with Brian Stevenson. And now I also cited the Princeton study and also dopamine. All that is pointing to the fact that one of the most outstanding things that you can do as a podcaster or YouTuber is to tell stories, because it allows you to achieve brain-to-brain coupling with your audience, plant ideas, plant emotions, and plant thoughts into their subconscious without their even knowing it. So here is one of the things that has been my passion for a long time, which is too many people think that if you have enough content, if you just stand up and deliver your content, you will connect. I beg to disagree. What you say is as important as how you say it.
Mm.
And in fact, the reality is that I have seen in my own lifetime alone, I have seen things that lack content. I mean, materials, precisely books. I've seen some books that just have no content, literally. But because of the marketing and the narrative and the storytelling that goes behind it, people buy it in droves.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've seen some stuff which I think this is just gold. This is just liquid wisdom distilled into a book. And guess what? The content is outstanding, but it doesn't go anywhere. Why? Because of the narrative that was not put behind it. Because somebody didn't make the effort to really put a story behind it.
Mm.
So this is important. Tell a story. So I guess I already made the point about the relative importance of pathos.
And can I just put this out there that even though this channel is called Storyteller Changemaker,
mm-hmm.
and my everything is Storyteller Changemaker, I had absolutely no idea that this presentation would even say anything about storytelling. You know, I just, you know, so I'm just as in shock, you know, that you are like, you know, even breaking it down even further, the power of storytelling, you know, so that's my disclaimer.
Right, that's fine. Yeah, I agree.
And also I'm so happy to hear this. Thank you so much.
Yes, I agree with your disclaimer. You didn't ask, you are hearing this content for the first time. So yeah, yes. That's correct. Yeah, so it's 65% storytelling, 25% data, and 10% ethos. Let me just throw this. I wanted to just literally bolt on one thing on, actually, no, for the sake of time, let's just move on. So the second point is harness the power of storytelling. Remember, the first point is be your authentic self. Second point is harness the power of storytelling. Excuse me. And the third is connect with your audience by having a key message. I didn't stumble into the presentation tonight. There's only one message in my heart. There's only one thing I'm trying to say. And I'm just using all kinds of different approaches to make the same point. There's only one point I'm making. And the point is that if you master certain principles, you can connect with any audience. That's my point. And I have that in the back of my mind. I'm not gambling and rambling around. It may look like I've lost my plot sometimes, but the reality is I know where I'm going and I know I will get there because I have a very clear target in mind. Now, this is not just a good thing to do. There's science behind this. You know, the human brain works in a very, very powerful way. And as a podcaster and as a YouTuber and as anybody who communicates in the public space, I think it behoves me for us to at least, even if it's just read a blog or two, listen to one YouTube video or two about how the human brain works in communication is important. So here is one of the things about the human brain. The human brain works best when it has a focus. When the human brain works best when it has a focus. This is the entire science behind goal setting. We set goals because once we set a goal, it gives a focus to our brain and our brain goes into turbocharge to deliver that goal. That's just the way we're wired. So there's an entire science of neurobiology behind focus. So let me just put this teaser out there if you like. So I've already run out of time, but maybe I'll just do this one and take a break and then we can decide what to do next. But let me put this thought out there. So
I'll be happy for you to please deliver everything that you came to deliver.
Continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, that's fine then. Okay, I'll keep going. So yeah. So the way the human brain works is this. So you let me tell this what's the word, a bit of a teaser, and I want you to interact with me on this one. So the story was told of a circus lion tamer who was an very experienced tamer, and he'd worked in circuses for decades. It came up to the point where he was looking to retire, and it came time to train his successor. And after a very elaborate process, selection process, which lasted about, I think, 12 months or something like that, a young man, very young man, was appointed as the apprentice trainer, the master apprentice tamer, to take over from this very experienced tamer. And on the first day, this guy was very excited to have been given the job amongst maybe thousands of applicants, young applicants who wanted to make that big break. And the first session that this young protege had with the master trainer said, there are 3 indispensable articles in the armory, if you like, of a lion tamer. One of them is a pistol that is always on the side of the tamer's trouser. The other is a whip. And the final one is a stool. He said to the understudy, said to the apprentice, which of them do you think is the most important of these tools? Which of them is simply a lifesaver? Now, I want you to interact with me on this one. Which of them do you think is the most important of this tool? Which of them is the lifesaver of the 3? Is it the whip, the pistol or the gun, or is it the stool?
I would say the stool.
Why do you think it's the stool?
I know the stool is the one that is what I remember of lion tamers is what they use the most, the one that moves around the most, the one that they kind of use to control the lion. So that's what I'm thinking, the stool.
That's the right answer. Why do you think this tool is that important? Why is this tool so important to a lion tamer? You just said that a lion tamer gets in, you've just implied that a lion tamer at a circus gets into a stage, into a cage is what I'm looking for, with a beast that is several times heavier, more powerful, and more destructive than them. And all they use to tame and control it is a stool. That doesn't make logical sense. Explain that.
Since you were talking about focus, I just thought maybe the stool would be something that you can use to direct the lion's focus. Tell me if I'm going off points, but it makes me think of like these bullfighters as well, with the red cloth that they use. It's also something that you kind of use to control what the bull is looking at, so that's what I'm thinking,
Absolutely. A lion, as powerful as a lion is, as aggressive as it is, as calculated as it is, the reality is when the tamer gets into the cage and is shot up with this beast that is several times its size and weight and faster than it by all accounts, the tamer points the stool to the lion, but it doesn't point the stool from the armrest. It points the legs of the stool. So the tamer holds on to the seat of the stool and points the 4 legs towards the lion. And that mesmerizes the lion because the lion now has 4 things to think about. In fact, 5 things. So the lion is thinking, which of the stool legs do I attack? But on top of that, it's five focuses. He wants to attack the 4 legs, but also wants to attack the tamer. In that sense, or that whole frenzy of deciding which of them to attack, the lion literally becomes mesmerized. the lion becomes completely deactivated. The lion becomes inactive, and throughout the process, the lion is unable to act because it has a broken focus. And this is the reason, this is the bottom line. At the end of, this is a very sobering fact, but I'll say it anyway. At the end of life, there'll be two groups of people. There'll be those who are successful and those who are not. Absolutely without fail, the difference between those who made it and those who didn't make it is that those who made it had a focus, and they stood fast and continued with their focus. And those who didn't make it just had diffuse focus. They just wanted to do 1,001 things at the same time. They didn't really know who they were. They didn't really know what they wanted out of life. So when this lion is all over trying to attack 4 or 5 things at the same time, its focus is broken, it becomes deactivated, and it becomes mesmerized. And by that, a lion tamer can control a beast that is much faster than him, much quicker than him, much bigger than him, much heavier than him, much deadlier than him. So first, focus is important. What's this got to do with podcasts? What's it got to do with YouTube? A lot. The bottom line is the moment I approach my presentation, my podcast, my YouTube video, the moment I approach it with a single headline subject in mind, it gets my brain into focus and into turbocharge to produce at a level it would otherwise not have produced if I didn't define my headline. So this is important. And in fact, over time, if you make a practice of doing that, of defining your headline and saying, if there's one thing I can leave with my audience today, what would it be?
This is the thing.
If you make a focus of that again and again and again, over time, it changes your brain to operate at a very focused level. It changes the neuroplasticity of the brain where it gets into a turbocharged zone of delivery again and again and again. A study was carried out by the University of Texas, and here is what they found. They found out that muscular, what's the word, MS, muscular sclerosis sufferers who had a focus and a goal and an ambition in life, at the end of a certain number of years, they all had better outcomes than those who didn't. And in fact, the outcomes not only compared better in comparison to those who didn't have goals, in fact, their outcomes compared better to what science would have expected them to do.
Could you say that again, please?
A study was carried out by the University of Texas, and it was based on a study of I think it's called muscular sclerosis, MS, sufferers, and multiple sclerosis is the word I'm looking for. And they found out two cohorts. The cohort of MS sufferers, multiple sclerosis sufferers who had goals and ambitions, specific goals and ambitions in life, their outcomes and their health conditions at the end of a certain period of years was much better than the cohort of those who didn't have any goals or any ambition, who just took one day as it came. But also their outcomes was also much better than science would have predicted according to their prognosis. So this is how the human brain works. You set the human brain a target, you set the human brain a goal, and it overperforms itself, it outperforms itself. That's just the way we're wired. So this is why it is important. And there are two things. So a study was also then carried out. Some people did a study, I believe it was Annals of Psychology. I think it's the actual reference. I've got the reference at the back of my slides. But they found out that there are two things that are most important about goals. The first is that it needs to be challenging. And the second is that it needs to be specific. What's that got to do with a podcast? Before you set in to the studio to record your podcast, be clear in your mind what you're trying to deliver. In other words, what is the one thing you want to leave with your audience? Specificity, but also let it be challenging. grapple with content that you may not otherwise have grappled with. Grapple with a delivery method that you might not otherwise have grappled with. Sometimes I've challenged myself I shared the experience I had earlier, challenge myself to speak without notes. Just something that gets your brain into turbocharge and makes it to outperform itself and deliver at a level that it would otherwise not have delivered. So point number 3, the third principle is connect with your audience by having a key message, have a headline. So remember, the first point was be yourself. Connect with your audience by being the authentic version of yourself. Secondly, connect with your audience by weaving your entire presentation into a narrative, into a story, or even tell several stories as I have already today. And the third point is to connect with your audience by having a key message. So let's take this one step further. And the final thing is connect with your audience by having a structure.
Can I just add something to what you just said?
Yeah, please.
That we read as a group last year is called the 16-word sales letter, and it's really also is based on this, your point number 3, where it's like one key message. So it is actually a best-selling sales letter, and all they say is that if you can make them believe, what is that one thing that you want them to believe through that sales letter? To say, if I want to make you believe this, and if you believe this particular thing, this mechanism that I'm trying to make you believe, then you will now know that the thing I'm trying to sell to you is the solution for you, or is the solution that you need to buy to get that one thing. So you're going to try and make them believe that this is the only way for you to do this thing. And the only way for you to be able to do this thing is to buy my product, or, attend my course or whatever, but that's the basis or the premise of that, of the sales letter. Also, I've heard it's used in people talking about your webinar presentation as well. What's the one thing that you want? So you will talk about other things, but what's that one thing? If you can just dilute it, and usually it's just like, that's why the man called it 16 words. It's just that one sentence that you just say, okay, if they can believe this through my presentation, then they will now, and they believe that this is what they need, they will get, they can get what they want by buying whatever it is. So I just wanted to add that, for our people.
That's helpful, yes. And so my final point or final principle is you should have a structure. And let me just caveat this by saying that the more comfortable you get in your own structure, the less you need to depend on the structure, right? I don't know, my knowledge of architecture is limited. However, as a basic understanding as a lay person, I know that most houses, if not all houses, have some kind of foundation, and they have some kind of framework that holds up the house. I know architecture is getting really, really creative and innovative these days, and there are all kinds of tricks being used by architects. But as a bottom line, houses have foundations and they have pillars as a bottom line in some shape or form. And your structure is the foundation and the pillar of your podcast or your presentation or your YouTube video. It needs to be there. And you can play around with it, you can move it around, but there needs to be a structure. And I have found that one of the most powerful things that you can do is to first, that you have some principles. So I've already discussed a number of principles tonight. So it's important to have some principles, but also you will not become a thought leader or an influencer until you're able to bring your own personal thought to the table. Here is what I mean. whatever it is you have read, and as a podcaster, as a YouTuber, it's a given that you will read widely, you will listen to other YouTubers, you will listen to other podcasters, you will read blogs, you will read books, you will just do your due diligence in terms of absorbing knowledge and information. However, when you've absorbed all that and you've brought it all together, the bottom line is that you've then got to decide what you think about that information. And people, anybody who picks up your podcast or visits your YouTube channel is there because they want to hear what you've got to say. Therefore, it's not enough to just regurgitate what you've heard from all of those things, all of those different sources. People want you to interpret it in your own way. People want to hear your slant on it. They want to hear your observation. This is important. And they want to hear you. They want to hear what you agree with. They want to hear what you don't agree with. They want to hear what you partially agree with. And they just want your own commentary on the information that you've brought to the table. And that's very important. So the commentary is important. But the bottom line is, having said all of that, I already said also, use illustrations, but very importantly, the bottom line is, what are you asking them to do? So I spoke earlier about the point, principle 3, which is connect with your audience by having a key message. Often, either implicitly or explicitly, that key message needs to have 2 elements. One is, what do you want them to know? And secondly, what do you want them to do? Right. So what is it that you want them to know because they came and listened to you, to your podcast, to your YouTube channel? And what action do you want them to take as a result of that? It's very important. So I haven't brought those 2 together. Let me just make that final point, the principle number 4. Principle 4 is you should have a framework and work with a framework that works for you. Experiment with different things. Over the last several years, I now know what works for me. I know if you call me to do a presentation with 5 minutes notice, I know the sort of things I need to include to make it work for me, even if I only have 5 or 10 minutes. And you need to come up with your own framework. I know the framework that works for me. Obviously, it will come as no surprise that telling stories is a huge part of that framework for me. And so have a framework and have a call to action. What is it that you want them to know, and what is it that you want them to do? So in summary, can
I ask you to
yes.
Can I ask you to say the same points, number 4, but can you give say it as if you're talking to somebody who wants to preach a message in church, biblical message, like if you were talking to a preacher and you were or to a pastor, to say, if you're going to preach this message, have a structure. How would you explain it to them?
If I wanted to say to a preacher, to preach this message, have a structure, I would say, obviously, you have to have a scripture. Secondly, you have to have a commentary from that scripture. What is it that you are bringing out of that scripture? You want to illustrate it in some shape or form. And thirdly, you would want to leave the people with a punchline and a call to action. What is it that you want them to do? So you have your scripture. You've done a commentary based on that scripture. You've probably pointed out certain things that they wouldn't normally have seen in that scripture. And finally, you've got to then share your own stories and so on and so forth. And finally, what do you want them to do? What is the call to action? What do you want them to do? So those are the, that's the way I would present that to a preacher.
Okay, it makes it clearer.
Yeah. So in terms of just tying this all together, be authentic, bring your authentic self to the room every single time around. That's the only chance you have of performing to the best of your ability and your potential. Tell a story because it connects you with the audience in a way that nothing else will. Focus on one key message. That key message would have different themes or different sub messages. Today, I've had 4 sub messages, all of them on the screen right now. And the final point is use a framework or a structure for your presentation, whether that, if you're in the context of preaching, obviously have a key scripture, have some commentary that derives from the scripture, use your illustrations, stories, anecdotes, and finally, what is the take-home message? What is the lesson? What do you want people to do as a result of this? And I will finish by going back to a point I made earlier, which is this. It is possible to learn, to connect, and to do it well. I've learned over the years that you can grow in connecting with audiences. And I remain a student of rhetoric, and where I am now, I'm sure it's not where I will be in another year, in 2 years, 5 years, because I will keep working at this art and tweaking it and reading and doing all kinds of things to get better at what I do. And I think for all of us who have the privilege of working in the public space, podcasters, YouTubers, speakers, in whatever shape or form we might be doing that, it is a responsibility that we hold to ourselves. So I think that's all I have in mind for today, really.
Thank you. I'm going to add to your number 4. So
okay.
Yesterday we released, or I released a podcast planner, and the podcast planner actually has a framework, and I gave a copy to the ladies that were doing their podcast episodes, and I did say to them that you can follow this framework for now, because it was just make your introduction, talk about your first topic, talk about your second topic, talk about the third topic, and then have your call to action, or your conclusion, your summary, and then what you want them to do next. But that they should just use that, start with that, but that eventually they would come up with their own. So it's so interesting that you said that, that you just try different frameworks until you find the one that works for you,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess my call to action to you would be, don't necessarily try to grapple with all the 4 points. One of them, 2 of them might particularly have struck a chord with you more than others, and come up with a plan as to how you will integrate this into your next podcast and make it a habit and a part of your preparation process. It's very key. And that's me. That's me done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let me.
I really enjoyed that. I'm sure we have questions. DK,
yes,
go first.
I have questions. Okay, so for me, I think I have overcome most of my fear of speaking as an introvert. I was someone that couldn't speak at all as a child. So people are wondering how I did it, but there are certain things you said today that I think people need to take into consideration, which is storytelling. I'm someone that is always over-prepared. If I'm going for a 30-minute lecture, I will have like 4 pages. My slides will be like 50 slides. Emma would start saying, okay, reduce your slides. This is a 30 minutes presentation. And I just love teaching. But now you're saying we should make it just one topic, one major focus with sub-teams in that major focus when we are talking. So what if it is two major ideas, but they are linked?
I think the short answer is that the more experienced and the more one experiments with one's craft, the more comfortable you get with mixing and matching those things. So as a principle, I would say start out with one major message, one major key message.
Mhm.
However, the more comfortable you get, the more creative you get. It's possible to have maybe two. I wouldn't encourage more than two.
Okay.
But I think the more important thing, and in fact, being over-prepared is not a bad thing. I think being over-prepared is much better, 100 times better than being under-prepared. And the way I see it is that when you are over-prepared, you can ad-lib. Often there are only a few fixed points. One of the fixed points is where am I going? What's the message I want to leave with these people? What do I want them to do in response? That's a fixed point, right? And because I know what that is, and I already have content, it may be that the content I have for principle 5, I can decide that actually in the way the story is flowing, I should bring it to principle 3 because it flows better. But because I'm prepared, I can just flow between my content very easily. And I guess the point I'm making is, as a principle for people who are starting out with this idea, it's good to start with one key message. The more experience one gets, and the more one learns one's self. This is one of the things I could have said, but I didn't say earlier, which is any public speaking in any shape or form is as much an art of learning the principles of public speaking as it is learning who I am as a speaker.
Okay.
And I think both of those things are important.
All right. Okay. So I've got another question also, because sometimes I have a script, but I don't go through it, especially when you're having a guest as a podcast for this. So when you're looking at the interview for your guests on your podcast, should your interview, I know the interview, you're supposed to give the person face and bring out, should you have a central theme you're trying to achieve with that podcast while booking your guests?
If I have an interview, anything I do in the public space in terms of presentation, whether it's a podcast, an interview, a workshop, or anything else, I have a reason in my mind of what I want to achieve. Because think about it this way, I'm sure, I don't believe that you've ever brought any interviewee to your podcast just randomly. I don't believe you've ever done that.
No.
When you went through the selection, that was only one person. There was something about that person that made you think, oh, that person will fit well on my podcast. What was it that made you decide to bring them to the podcast? Whatever it is that made you decide to bring them to the podcast is what you want to get across to the people. You may not have explained it to yourself that way, but that's the fact. And so that's what you work with them. And often I hear podcasters, and it's not unusual that you then explore certain lines of inquiry with them. Whatever that line of inquiry happens to be is what you really want to get across to them. So even though they're the interviewee, as the interviewer, you still, in fact, the interviewer has got to be as prepared, as I'm sure you know, as the interviewing themselves.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I'm reminded of, one of the things I'm reminded of is from yesterday is that the ladies that were doing their podcast, they would want to sit down and say everything, because they're full of content. They have different things that they want to talk about, and they were surprised to find that you say to them, just talk about this one thing, and make your whole podcast episode about this one thing. It was surprising, because I think there's that thing of wanting to over deliver, and then you now want to say everything all in one spot. But it's easier to have that one thing that you're focused on, because through that one thing you're able to bring in other the other points if they need to be, but at least you're focusing on that one thing. In fact, one of the podcasters yesterday, she has a she's launching a podcast on autism, well, on helping neuro something pediatrics, whatever, so autism, epilepsy, and all that. And one of the episodes which she talked about was, she simply talked about parents being in denial, of accepting that there's something wrong with their child and the different reasons why this happens and that kind of thing. But it was interesting to say for her, I guess, as well, for her to hear that, just talk about only this, just talk about denial. What does it mean when you've come across so many parents who are in denial about their children's diagnosis, and and it really went so well. But instead of coming to say, okay, I'm a neuro something pediatrician, I'm going to talk about everything I know about this subject, it's easier for you to have that one key message. So yeah. This is so helpful. I'm going to quickly summarize what I got, just for the benefit of those, or what I got from it. I love the ethos, pathos, and logos description of how to look at your presentation. How much of it is ethos, how much of it is pathos, how much of it is the logos. I also I don't think you can overstate how important it is to be authentic, and of course you don't need to say much to me about or convince me about the importance of storytelling. I believe that is one of the most important ways that you can actually pass your message on to people in a very in a very deep way and heart to heart way. So I love that you brought that in as a big part of what you're saying. But thank you so much, Kenny Ajayi, thank you so much. So any other questions? Let's see. I know that there's some people watching on YouTube. Let me see if there's any questions on YouTube.
It's another question I want to have is the structure of your podcast. So if you're doing a series and you want to introduce the series first, and then you're going to have episodes after the series, what would be the best way for you to talk about the series? Because the series may be very broad. Do you want us to would it be good to just talk about it in a short trailer, or will you recommend starting with the series and then going into the first topic you're going to talk about? Or should you give a kind of a breakdown of what you're going to talk about in the future episodes, then leave like cliffhangers for people to come back and listen to it?
So are you talking about how to introduce the series, or how to just...
I want to do on goal setting. Well, for the next 5 episodes, I'm going to be doing a series on productivity, something like that. Okay, so what I'm saying is, so from that first episode, do you do a breakdown of, oh, it's going to be a 4-part series, or do you just let it flow naturally?
Okay, I think, okay, yeah. So, well, I don't know what Kenny would say about that. Okay, I think we've lost him. But I guess what you're asking is, if you have a series coming up, it's funny that you mentioned it, because I actually sent Dr. Takot a few ideas of series that she can do, and I wanted her to do a series for teachers, and a series for parents, and then a series where she's interviewing parents of children with disabilities.
Exactly, something like that. Yes.
So, but then I think for that, I guess an introduction and telling them, foreshadowing what is going to come. Because at the end of the day, the series, okay, for instance, the series is for parents. So that is the information that you need to get in that first episode. Who is it for? So the series is for parents, and who would benefit from it, and that kind of thing. And then you can as the series goes on, you then go parents by parents, or different interviews, or different topic by topic. you know. But oh, that was amazing. I really hope he will come back on so that we can say a big thank you to him for that. I mean, that was really, really amazing. Okay, I was going to play something anyway. Let me just share. I was going to play this at the end of his at the end of the presentation, but I will play this now, and then I'll see whether if he's able to join us before we round up. So just give me a second, and I will play.
Okay.
The video. There we go. Right. Okay.
Hi, my name is Kenny Ajayi. I'm the convener and host of EIPP, Excellence in Pulpit and Power.
EIPP is a program aimed towards young and upcoming teachers and preachers to give them insights and helpful guidelines to be able to discover their calling and develop their ministry.
And EIPP is simply Excellence in Pulpit and Power, a congregation of young and old people coming together.
EIPP is a platform, is a Christian platform, whereby young preachers, old preachers, or anyone that has been led by the Spirit of God can discover their talent in preaching.
And it's a space for people who are experienced preachers, but I think particularly for those who are interested in preaching and are upcoming preachers themselves. So those are people who maybe have preached before or people who might be thinking about preaching.
It's a ministry dedicated to raising teachers and preachers and Christian speakers in the public space who will preach and teach and speak the word of God with power and with integrity and move in dimensions of the Spirit unknown to previous generations.
The church needs future generation of dynamic preachers and teachers. That is why a seminar like Excellence in Pulpit and Power is very important.
And this is really particularly important to young people like me who are active in church. You know, you probably do one thing or the other in church.
EIPP has been going on for a while, and it's been of great benefit to young Christians, old Christians.
And I would really encourage other people who believe they have a calling but they don't know how to go about it to even attend the next session.
I have attended the last 2 EIPP meetings and they've been great.
Sharing strategies of how to become effective preachers and teachers, learning great strategies of how to communicate the word of God or communicate whatever you have in your mind to other people effectively.
Which will be really useful going forward in a lot of our Christian communities so that we can all be strengthened in the word of God.
Exciting gems that I wouldn't want anybody to miss.
The bottom line is you hear some people and you want to listen to them again. Some you don't. If you want to be among those that people want to listen to, the seminar is for you.
And it's my pleasure today to invite you personally to join us at our virtual inauguration event on Sunday the 30th of May 2021.
You can register on the Eventbrite and
let's share the word of God together. Let's communicate, let's fellowship together.
If you ever talk to somebody at work, at school, or in church, or anywhere, I am really inviting you to join the next edition of Excellence in Pulpit and Power. So this is my official invite to everyone out there. See you.
looking forward to see you there.
I hope to see you there.
God bless you and see you on the 30th of May.
I just wanted to show that video so that I would ask you to just tell us about the EIPP for your, if anybody's interested or anybody that watches this in future is interested in taking part.
Right, thank you. Yes, I have for about a year now I have been privileged to work with a group of people, and the outfit is called Excellence in Pulpit and Power, and the mission really is to raise a generation of preachers and speakers and teachers, Christian speakers in the public space who will speak the word of God with integrity and power, and will move in dimensions of certain operations of God which were unknown to previous generations. We run a seminar every couple of months, every alternate months, and the next seminar is in September. It's the last Sunday of September, and the seminars are from 7 o'clock. From 5 o'clock till 7 o'clock, and they take many different forms. And so we advertise them via Eventbrite, and we share the flyers widely. So if you're so inclined and you're a Christian speaker or teacher or preacher in the public space and you'd like to join us, then you'd be most welcome. I think the next date precisely, I'm just checking that up. I believe it's the 25th of September, and it's a Sunday. So I think that's it really for EIPP.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I would recommend it. I was just saying to Kenny the other day that I don't know why I'm only seeing men in the adverts. So it's not only men.
Read my mind.
It's not only men.
No, it's not only men, and it's actually proper speaker training. So it's not but it is speaker training for people who are preachers and who are speakers in the public space, as you said.
That's correct, yes.
And I think it's admirable, because sometimes, like you said at the beginning, you might have the charisma and some of these things come naturally to you, but then even if you have the gifts, you should still develop the gifts that you have, and this kind of training is really helpful for that, so but thank you so much for the presentation. We were just talking about it when you got booted off Zoom, that we really enjoyed it. That was really amazing. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation and coming to share your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure spending the time with you.
A quick question about the EIPP. Do you have to be in ministry?
No, you don't have to be in ministry.
All right.
It's for.
And is it virtual or physical?
At the moment, it's virtual, but we will be doing some physical events as time goes on.
Okay, 25th of September. I am interested.
Okay, right.
All right, thank you very much. Emma will give me details.
Okay.
Yes.
How can we register? Is the link up for, because September is already next week?
It would be on Eventbrite, and the event would be on Zoom on a Sunday evening, 5 to 7. Yeah.
And if we want to connect with you, where can we reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on I'm on LinkedIn. The EIPP email is eippint@gmail.com. That's eippint@gmail.com.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And we will say good night. If nobody has anything else to say, we will say good night for now. And thanks for joining us. And thank you for what you said. If you want to watch, I would recommend everybody goes and watches it back again, and hopefully we'll have you again sometime soon.
Yes. Let me just say one final thing. Some of the materials I referred to, I didn't get to the reference page or bibliography. There's a book I'll recommend very highly. It's called TED, Talk Like TED. And
Okay.
some of the things I spoke about from that book, there's Talk Like TED and a few other things. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Definitely, we love book recommendations. Oh, that's a good one. Talk Like TED. So
Yes.
yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.